What's the website? Pictures of Asians taking pictures of food?
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Panaringan. I'm the food columnist for cultureoc.org, and I'm also a freelance writer for publications like Eater and LA's.
I always take one menu for the table.
I don't really consider myself a food critic. I think that's a term that's generalized for people who might be a restaurant reviewer, who might do food content and things like that. But for myself, I like to call myself a food writer because I inform more than anything else. And so I feel like my work in publications like Eater or for my existing media outlet Culture OC, that I inform the community about what's new out there. I feel like sometimes concepts come that might be very popular, that might be, for lack of a nicer way to say it, Instagram friendly. And I think those get more traction and more attention because of that.
Right.
But for myself, I do want to support local businesses, small businesses, minority-owned businesses. I feel like they need those voices need to be heard.
How do you think that your articles have influenced the future of Asian food for us food bloggers, restaurateurs? Where do you see the future of Asian food going?
If something has shown us anything, it's the idea that certain cuisines, like let's just take Korean food for example. There's this whole thing on social media with Trader Joe's and kimbap,
Right.
correct me on pronunciation. You know, educating people on things, the backstory, the cultural history sometimes, or just very straightforward information, not necessarily my opinion, get people excited about other things besides what they might find on, say, Yelp.
Right, because we know how well that goes. I mean, she taught me how to become a food critic in that episode. What?
I was just picturing when you're doing a video and you're like, I'm gonna put a link above for, you know, the thing that I'm talking about before. Just like, put the link right here.
I would love to know what a day in the life looks like for you. How do you source your next article? What kind of restaurant do you typically choose to go to? Do you kind of lean more towards the Asian American fusion, or is it more broadly to fit your taste?
It's kind of a compound question. The first part of the question, I would say that there's no one guaranteed way to find like the next restaurant I want to cover. Sometimes I might be driving by it and I might notice I don't recognize it and I'll pull over and look it up on Yelp, yes. Sometimes I'll get a recommendation from a chef friend. Industry contacts, yes, definitely if there's representation. I might get a press release. It really varies. There's no one true method.
Code green, code green. Anne-Marie, I think we found our next spot. I think it's gonna be good.
What are you doing? They already know I'm coming.
So how do you typically prepare for your review? You visit the restaurant, you take your notes, you go home and you write about it? Or is it a little more in-depth?
It's actually a lot less formal than you think.
Oh.
Because when I go to a restaurant, I'm not always sure exactly how I'm going to incorporate it into a story yet.
Okay, so we just got sat at Dolan's Uyghur Cuisine, and their menu doesn't look like anything that I've ever tried before, and it looks incredible. There's stuff like fried naan with beef, and there's manta, which looks like dumplings. How do you figure out what to order? Like what calls your name, or do you just get one of kind of everything?
I think it kind of just depends how I'm feeling that day.
Yeah.
I would have normally had looked at the menu before I left the house. I'm that person where I had shrimp yesterday, therefore I don't feel like having shrimp today.
What are your thoughts so far? What are you thinking?
I'm really excited because this is unlike what you normally find in the city. So different is good, as long as it's done well.
So how do you pick and choose what to feature in your article based on their menu?
Probably at 2 a.m. The day of, is I'll be lying in bed scrolling through the menu on my phone. I will look for items that aren't as run-of-the-mill. Maybe ingredients I don't recognize, or I might look for just something that sounds so sensational because it's done tableside, or they're using a really hip ingredient and it's smoky, for a cocktail. Because a lot of it, I admit, some of it has to be visually stunning.
Right.
In the end, we're always talking about taste. If we're gonna spend good money, it has to be good money on good food.
So for those of you guys that don't know what Uyghur is, on their website it says Uyghur way of life is now at a crossroads. One path leads to cultural preservation and dignity for the Uyghur people. The other path is less than certain. At Dolan Uyghur Restaurant, we are committed to preserving what we can, the food and flavor of Uyghur culture. So they're a mixture of all the countries surrounding China, and their food really reflects that. You get I noticed a little bit of Tibetan food, like the mantas, and then you get almost, I want to say, like Middle Eastern kebab noodle. So it's very much reflective of those regions. So we ordered the lagman. We also ordered a cumin lamb. And then we got this manta, which is the Uyghur style dumplings. Emery got a Dolan's tea special, and Nate got a black tea.
I always take one menu for the table because when the food comes out, half the time we don't remember what we ordered.
Oh yeah.
And the other half is we want to know what we're eating exactly. Because we'll always end up saying like, oh, what's that? And just grab the menu.
So I have in recent years started talking about not as new places. So
Right.
I'll have topics in my column for Culture OC where I find similar, characteristics for a few restaurants, and so I can talk about something newer versus something that's been around a while.
I love the article that you just did, the 2-in-1 switch for restaurants, where they are in one location in the morning, they're one thing, and then in the evening, they switch to something else.
Yes.
And I wanted to point out in that article, they were all Asian focused.
They just happened to be. I wasn't out there gunning for, let's talk about Asian restaurants.
Right.
I wasn't even trying. It just, when I sat down and wrote it, I said, by the way, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, do you think coming from an Asian background, these restaurants, where I would say Asian people are very efficient with how they utilize things, never waste anything, right?
With our individual upbringings, our parents really, if it's not pushing education on us, it's pushing to just strive and to be better and work harder, and then what's the next thing? I think there's this constant hustle.
Right.
There's always people who want something different. But then there are people who want to respect, this is how I want my Asian food. It should be like, this is how my grandmother made it.
Right.
And if we can make sure that both can coexist, then I think we'll be okay.
What's the website? Pictures of Asians taking pictures of food? That's what my friends always reference whenever they see me do this.
But I see what you're saying. I mean, what's popular is what's new and hip and fusion and pretty. Yes, I worry about more traditional cuisine being slowly fading in the background.
Right.
Well, I guess you can say it takes someone like myself to be able to cover that, since most people will cover things that are more trending.
So what do you do with these videos and photos? Do you use them as reference later as you're writing up the article?
Mostly I use them as reference later, but a lot of the time I have to do my own photography. The thing I always forget is, because we're so used to holding our phones a certain way, is that my editors always prefer it like this.
Yeah.
So I have to remember, I try now to take a picture landscape first before I go portrait.
Got it. These are things you gotta remember. So when you're trying the food, are you looking for taste, presentation? What do you judge it on?
Everything. There's not one particular thing. You ever notice how sometimes things that look ugly taste really good?
Yeah. How do you feel about non-Asian chefs? I don't want to say exploiting, but interpreting, reimagining Asian cuisines for their restaurants?
I mean, it's such a loaded question because we can really, let's be honest, we can apply that question to all the different cuisines.
Right. I mean, I asked him, how are you able to do Japanese cuisine when you're not even Japanese? So where do you get the authority to do that?
Part of it, and I'm not a chef, I'm not a restaurateur, so this isn't, I'm not speaking on behalf.
But you have an opinion.
I have an opinion, yes. I firmly believe that as long as that chef, as that person who's representing the restaurant, if they have the credibility, if they spent time in a certain country learning the cuisine, or they went to culinary school specifically for that cuisine, or their mentor was of that ethnicity, if they have a legitimate tie to a certain cuisine, then that makes sense to me that they could do that. But also, let's say they don't. In my mind, if they're not trying to act like this is ours, this is how it should be, this is, they need to make it very clear that this is their interpretation of it, that they're not the be-all, end-all, this is what Vietnamese cuisine or Japanese cuisine should be.
It's almost like a bao, soup dumpling, extra large. Tastes like a burger patty.
You know how you said you thought there might be sauce? I don't know that it needs any.
It's so flavorful. I wasn't sure I would like lamb. That's actually really good.
I figured the cumin might make a difference because it was a very specific line item. Yeah, the cumin
Very
makes all the
flavorful.
difference.
God, it's really long.
Good call.
Know?
You're cutting the long life.
Oh no!
It's a really long noodle. That was satisfying, wasn't it?
It reminds me of a little bit of Korean noodles.
Okay.
Not as flavorful as the cumin beef, but it's a cross between a soup and like a stir-fried noodles.
It's very thick
And chewy.
and chewy.
So with that in mind, as a writer to a potential cookbook writer, what advice do you have for me in that realm?
I mean, first of all, you've already done one cookbook, so I think you've learned a lot from that, especially with the route that I believe you're taking with the next cookbook. Being your authentic self, I think, is everything. Don't necessarily go to what you expect everyone else, wants.
Yeah.
Because, like we said, you're not going to please everyone.
Right.
But if you can make yourself happy, and I know being true to yourself would make you happy, that's what's most important.
So much of what I want to do leans more towards the fusion side of things, just because that's just how I grew up and how my taste buds have evolved with my environment. So I think there's a place for both there.
I do think so. I think doing fusion can take someone who might be hesitant to try a certain cuisine and bridge that gap.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie, for joining me on today's conversation, the future of Asian food in America. Be sure to give her a follow on Instagram and check out her stories on
cultureoc.org.
like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.